Welcome to the Blah 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 podcast. I am Brenda Martinez, and today we'll be talking about the evolution of Cartoon Network from the 90s until now. I'm here today with Matthew Goriachkovsky and Kylie George. Cartoon Network was born in 1994. Initially, programming on the channel consisted of Dexter's Laboratory, Cow and Chicken, and Courage Goalie Dog, just to name a few. All of these shows became very popular, but got canceled. Why do you think this happened?
Well, I think that in the 90s, the shows got canceled because the largest viewing base was mainly younger people. So when they started to grow up, going into the 2000s, they started to watch other things like more adult shows like cop shows or other things. So the other shows started to become less popular, and so they just sort of stopped because there wasn't as much viewing base.
Yeah. In the 90s, the shows they had a lot of dark humor, and they weren't as straightforward. So, as the years went by, they realized I believe that they realized that children view kid shows more than adults view the dark humor ones. So, I just believe that they decided to change the shows and change what they're doing.
Okay, shortly after the 90s, they started to broadcast shows like Ben 10 and Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. How are these shows different from the ones they used to broadcast during the 90s?
Well, for example, Ben 10 was an action show. Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends was silly, and Cody and Kids Next Door was also action. So I think they switched from dark humor to more of a action and silly instead of using a lot of humor, because kids don't really get it anyways. So they just like seeing a lot of motion and a lot of crazy things happening.
Yeah, and I mean, from the 90s, they had, like, with Cow and Chicken, that was sort of like a really outlandish show, but it wasn't so, like, I've seen it before, and while watching it, I didn't really have, like, the whole sense of, this is so weird, and, like, just changing. I thought it was just sort of like a normal thing. But as you got into the 2000s, they started to get, like, you had more relatable characters, like, you had an actual human being that you could relate to, and so with that human being that you could relate to, they just made a slight spin on it, so it made it interesting. And so they had like the right amount of outlandishness and the right amount of relatability. And as Matthew said, the humor had evolved from like really dark humor to like silliness and like more youth-friendly humor.
Okay, nowadays they broadcast shows like Regular Show and Adventure Time. So how have the storylines evolved?
Well, with the newer shows, they have a really huge, like really young fan base. Like Adventure Time has about 2 to 3 million people watching the show each week. And that like 1.66 million of those people are ages from 2 to 11, and some like 800,000 people are aged 9 to 14, and so these shows are just really really popular, and it's really interesting because this show is so outlandish. Like it takes place in a post-apocalyptic world called the land of Ooh, and it's just so insane that when you watch it, you're like, what am I watching? And you just sit there in this like state of awe where you're just like, how did the creators like come up with this? And actually that's pretty interesting because they came up with it from it was originally a short on Random Cartoons, which was on Nickelodeon, but the creators saw that it was like the clip went viral, so they made it into a full-blown show, and it became popular instantly. And so with the regular show, that was also a really like outlandish show because it's about like a blue jay and a raccoon who are landskeepers at a park, and so they're just like their adventures. But you sit there and you're like, what am I watching? Like, this is so odd because they get into like really like sometimes like supernatural type altercations that are just insane. The same with Chowder. Chowder was, I really liked Chowder because it had really interesting animation where it had like the background was like a stationary patterned, it kind of looked like paper, and it looked like the characters were pasted onto the paper and moving across it, so the background would stay still while the characters moved around it. But this was also another one of those like incredibly insane shows where you were like, what am I watching? Because it was like this really weird cat character in this made up world who would just cook food that wasn't in our world with this other weird character or creature, and it was just so odd. So the evolution from the silliness and the action to these more outlandish shows has really just been really evident.
Yeah, all I could say is that the writers have certainly gone much more creative. I was watching some of these shows yesterday, actually, and I noticed that they were very juvenile and pretty much ridiculously outrageous, especially Adventure Time. They just do a whole bunch of crazy things now. The humor is more straightforward, definitely, but it's just crazy when I watch it. There are just so many things going on there, and I don't think that it's meant for children. I think at this era it goes more for like more mature kids who would understand what's going on and appreciate this new type of creativity.
Which is really interesting though, because like the main fan base is ages from 2 to 11, when the people who can actually understand the humor are much older, like in the 9 to 14 range. But that again is lower. But it doesn't. There were statistics I didn't say how many people watch it over the age 14, but I'm guessing it must be again like a lot of people.
I just think that kids really like seeing outrageous things, people getting hurt, and just things like a lot of action, and that's what these shows have. And there might be some comedy that they understand, but that's not really what's going on in the shows.
Which one's your favorite?
From all of them, I personally am a fan of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends and Codename Kids Next Door, because they just they were just outside the realm of possibility, where my little kid brain was like, oh, I can totally become this when I'm older, or like I can totally just like make up my own imaginary friend and go to a house and send him to live, and I can just hang out there all day like Mac did in Foster's Home, or I could like join this allegiance of kids in these like tree houses all over the world and just like have incredible adventures like they did on Codename Kids Next Door. And just they were just so interesting and so like they weren't feasible, but they were just outside the realm of possibility, so I thought that I could do that when I was little.
Yeah. My favorite show, I'd probably say Dexter's Laboratory, just because it isn't straightforward and because of its dark humor. There's a lot of hidden things in there that make the show really funny, even though it seems like it's supposed to be for kids. And also, there are a lot of deleted scenes in Dexter's Laboratory that are great, but they weren't allowed to air because children weren't allowed to hear things like that. But it was just a really cool show to watch. There was a lot of action actually, and it was just really great.
Thank you for listening to Blah Blah Blah's podcast of Cartoon Network's evolution from weird to insane. I'm your host, Brenda Martinez, with Matthew Goriachkovsky and Kylie George.